Yeah, we'll make some adjustments to the agenda. So. We could just change the bylaws to where Carrie and I are the only ones that get them.
They've been adopted.
No,
Do whatever you want.
we could turn out.
Yeah. Let's see. Interesting. I went down that. Good explanation on it. Explains the weirdness.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started and maybe people will show up as far as the exec committee goes. So welcome. We'll quickly go around the room for introductions. I'm Jeff Goldman, the Chief Probation Officer.
Angie Coffey, probation.
Jeremy Vance, probation.
Paul Litchfield, probation. Wall Sheriff's Office.
Georgia Erno, Sheriff's Office. Eric Parkachini, Sheriff's Office.
Brendan Brown, Sheriff's, or
Sheriff.
Switch sides. You're out of here, buddy.
That's what happened to our last team.
Linda Valente, probation.
Steve Sinclair, probation. All right, if, I don't know what order everyone's on the screen, if you could just introduce yourself.
Hardy
Amy
Bullock,
Lisenby,
Board of
District-
Supervisors.
There we go. We got 3 at once. That's good.
I'm here.
Leslie Williams, Sheriff's Office.
Denise Harbin, District Attorney's Office.
Sarah Hollyhead, CEO's fiscal team.
Alex Gamble, Grass Valley PD.
Josh Browning, probation.
Jody Tucker, probation.
Phoebe Bell, behavioral health.
Lucas Turner, HHSA.
All right. I think we got most folks on there. So the first part was, establishing a quorum. I think we have 3 now because Alex popped up there. So we do not.
Oh, no, Phoebe's.
Yeah. And so we'll skip the approval of the minutes. We still have January and March to approve. Oh, Tanya. Now we have a quorum. Right?
Yes.
Correct. Okay. All right. So I don't know if folks had a chance to read the minutes. I believe Linda sent those out with the agenda.
There's copies over here.
All right. And so if someone's ready, if I can get an approval to for the minutes, we have both January and March. So, make sure you were there on one of those dates to make that motion and then get approval. So we could separate those 2 because I don't know if everyone was at all those places. That might be the problem for the vote.
Do you want them both? I can make a motion for both because I was there for both and then.
Okay. Can I get a second?
I second.
All right. Any discussion or changes?
Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. I'm going to skip the rest of it because that was unanimous. So. All right. And then we have public comment. If there's any public comment, I don't think there was anyone from the public on there. And then we'll get down to Innovation Fund Award updates. So at the last meeting, we awarded those two grants for the innovation funds that we had decided upon. And so I just asked Angie to give us an update as to kind of the contracting piece of that, or the.
Yes, to try and, make the most of the last couple months of the fiscal year that we have. We got those contracts in place pretty quickly, so they're both active contracts right now. Women of Worth, who hasn't contracted with the county before, I'm trying to set up a meeting with her to just kind of go over some of the, the fund that the auditor requires. That, but those are both up and going, and no reporting or billing yet since it's fairly recent.
Any questions about those, or questions about how to make referrals, or to get people engaged in those programs, or anything like that? I mean, we're still working, I think, on that process. Correct.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about this morning. I think that would be a first step, kind of discuss some of those things and some of the things we put into the contract as far as data points, if we want them to, how we want them to report, if we would like them to report and give a presentation to the CCP about how things went. Also discuss with them some of the weird things about, the contracting and backup for billing and stuff like that, especially since one of them has never had a contract with the county. So I think that can happen pretty quickly, but that has not happened yet.
So maybe next meeting, I mean, just to make sure that they're invited and they can attend, and just give us a brief. I mean, obviously, they're not going to have like program outcomes, stuff like that, but just kind of a brief update as to what they're doing. Any questions about that? All right, the next thing that's been pending is bylaws. And those have been sent out a couple of times. And so essentially, I realized we didn't have bylaws. And so we put some stuff together, or we put a draft together. And I haven't gotten a ton of feedback. And so I think the next step is, I mean, we can do one of several things, I guess. In the one that I sent out, it had some comments on it. I think the big comment would be, the penal code describes the membership of the executive committee, and we had talked about the ability to have a designee or second for voting purposes. And I think the question that I had posed, that I think, at least from my perspective, probably needs to be run through county council, is when it's outlined by code, do we have the ability to say one designee or a second, and how does that look? Because some of them that I've looked at look a little bit different for the elected officials versus the non-elected, as to how that gets.
Wait,
I forget exactly, but it had different verbiage to where it was like, I think one had the ability to designate anyone, and the other one had some sort of hierarchy as to how it was assigned. And I didn't know if that was relative to any sort of legal standing or just preference. So that was kind of the county council question. And I'm not an expert in public meetings and all that kind of stuff, so I wouldn't, hazard a guess on that. The only other things that I had as notes was, should we put a minimum number of meetings per year? I know that we had discussed meeting, I think 4 times a year at least. So adding that to the bylaws, and then also pushing out, like setting the agenda maybe to 2 weeks, given the public notice posting requirements, so that Linda has enough time to gather the information and then, post it and do all that stuff that is required, instead of 1 week that was in there. And then same goes with the budget. There was some stuff that said 1 week, all budget requests must be submitted to the chair designee in writing at least 1 week prior to the meeting. And I was thinking about changing that for 2 weeks. That gives us time to kind of put together that summary versus being such a short notice.
It also gives you time to come back at us and say, hey, could you bump up this section and give us a little bit more? 'Cause
Yeah.
we need-
Well, that was the next line too about, it says that will be funded a budget justification. And instead of a justification, I was thinking about like, in the agreed upon format or something, some sort of language like that, how we have that form currently or whatever iteration that evolves into.
It's a big, that line in the budget, it's budget section 1B. You specify at least 1 week prior to the January meeting, but what if we don't have a January meeting? I think it should just be prior to the first meeting of the year, the calendar year. We'll still need to make sure the timelines line up with the county budget timelines. Exactly.
And then we also have on D, it says the chair will compile the approved request and submit the budget along with the recommended revenue distribution methodology to the CCP Executive Committee at the meeting held in February for a vote. So,
This whole section assumes that we're meeting every month.
not sure what, the term revenue distribution methodology too. Yeah. And then on the additional funding requests, the innovation fund, I think that should be added to since that has been added. And the only other thing which, we'll talk about more is I do think we should have something in there about subcommittees. And we're going to talk about a little bit later, our next, I think, the data group and some of the struggles we've had around that. So I think if it was in the bylaws, something around subcommittees might be helpful to kind of lock that into the participation and the activities and expectations of those groups. Does everyone agree about that, or
I don't think that's part of our groups.
there's a section in there?
Yeah. Page 6. Page 6.
Is there anything else, folks that looked at it? Alex, Tanya, anyone else?
I think I sent you my track changes on it a while back, so I think they got incorporated, or at least most of them were just questions more than anything. I concur with your thought. I think we should seek an opinion from, I suppose, county council related to that, because I just would want to make sure that should we have anyone who ever challenges a decision, that we had the appropriate people. I'm all for the ability to have a designee if that is allowed. I just think we should make sure we're all confirmed on that.
Yeah, and I sent it to them hoping to have something before this meeting, but I haven't yet, so I'll follow up with that. So at this point, I don't see, unfortunately, us having a vote on it, and it's probably better if everyone's here to go to vote on this one, since it kind of dictates what we're going to do moving forward. So I will go back to county council and follow up, and in our next meeting, hopefully it will be at least to the point that we can vote, make any amendments and get it locked in so that folks can have their designees. And we can, at least that way, hopefully if it goes right with county council, we can always have a quorum because we'll have those designees or seconds in place. So.
I saw comments from Sam about those.
All the comments we got, I know that we incorporated in there, I believe, the ones that
Yeah,
were comments, not just,
that was quite a while ago,
Observation,
though.
yeah.
I'm not sure if those included Sam's or not. But I don't think
and we'll go back and check.
Okay. I think he sent it to the sheriff, so I don't know if it then got forwarded
Okay.
to you, so.
Any other questions on that? All right, so the next thing we have on here is the data group. And so a while back, we made a strategic plan. We spent, I think, 2 days with a technical assistance provider to come up with a strategic plan. And a big piece of that was goal number 1, actually. CCP will be data-driven in decision-making and evaluating outcomes. And there's some objectives along with that. Determine what data reports are needed to inform decisions, create a representative work group, explore funding and staffing for an analyst. CCP will develop a template report, the data reports, and a standing agenda item to present these reports. And so the data group is kind of sputtered, and some bits and hasn't really got off the ground. And I think, we tried a couple of things of like, let's start with things we're already reporting and we'll report out on that because that's easy because we can already kind of grab some of those things or things that we already have to kind of collect relative to, the CCP report or other reports that different individuals report on, but we just really haven't gotten kind of a core group to work on these things and to be able to report out. And I think the way that the strategic plan kind of rolled out, that was kind of a key into how we make funding decisions and programming decisions and all those sorts of things. And without that information, it kind of handcuffs us in making those decisions. And so I think that the next step, at least from my perspective, and is we'll schedule another meeting for this data subgroup, but I'll attend like at least a department head or a manager or something like that attend with whoever their appointed analyst is, so that they can help support that endeavor and help it proceed and kind of get folks pointed in the right direction. I know that the Sheriff's Department, at least, what I've heard from Brendan is that I think Leslie is always willing to participate in those sorts of things, which we appreciate. We just have to get everyone in there in the same room, and so that we can start moving this forward. Because until we even get like the idea of what elements we want to collect, it's going to be difficult to get to these other objectives and steps that the exec committee has decided to move forward. Are there any questions, comments?
I'm just wondering if maybe going about it in the opposite direction would be more helpful. Like, I feel like we had this similar conversation 6 months ago about, trying to get a data group off the ground, and maybe instead of like putting it on them, it should be like, let's focus on objective or 2 or 3 and say, these are the data points that we need. This is the data that we need to move the objective forward. And then go back to the data group and say, how can you now facilitate the process of collecting the data?
I think we kind of tried that at the very beginning as well, because we had a list like, department heads submit your list of data elements relative to these things. And it didn't really move forward either. But I'm open to all ideas. And I think there's some legislation coming down that we'll talk about in a minute. And like all the legislation that's been proposed in the last couple of years around the CCP, it's been about more data reporting to the state. And in a minute, when we talk about this next one that's coming down, I think it has a good chance of passing, possibly, and it would be good to have that, be able to get that information beforehand and figure out what we need to make adjustments before we submit all that information to the state.
Well, that would be helpful information then to know, right? Like, what are the possible, or what's the direction that the state is going in potentially, and the data needs that we would need to have as a county to support that.
The first iteration, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, was going to correct you. Why don't we just have like, these are the things that you said on, I'd say you in the general sense, these are the things that you say you will do relative to your funding request. Like your funding request says that, like if it's specialty courts for the public defender and DA, like we'll serve this many clients, you know, we'll engage this many people in this thing, we'll spend this much time in court, like just kind of, I mean, starting out kind of just widgets. And that was kind of the starting point.
Yeah.
On top of the things that have to be included in the CCP report. And then we just haven't been able to get the folks together to even get to that point, I think. I mean, I'll let you.
Most recent. Initially, just participation, we had some good brainstorming, but then the subsequent meetings just haven't had as much traction.
So that was the only idea of like having someone else besides the analyst be on there to kind of like, you know, since it's kind of the exec committee's idea to make sure that their ideas are being realized relative to whatever piece of the group that they represent.
Have you, I mean, we recently, I don't know, how long has Rad Plus been going?
Here, man.
So it's kind of an idea that the chief had about looking at our kind of internal data and having a meeting around that. And I think when you initially kind of put that out, everybody's kind of going, well, what the heck are we going to be doing in this meeting? And as we've had them, when we kind of like, you know, got some momentum and thinking and kind of taking deeper dives into things, it's created more questions. And we're looking at other things and how we're inputting stuff and what we need to actually start tracking. So eventually, I mean, I just kind of see it the same way as like just getting some momentum with this, and then it might kind of take off from there. And a good starting point is, yeah, what are the funding requests? What are we supposed to be, the populations we're serving? Yeah, widget data basically. But then maybe asking questions out of that and kind of getting further along. But I think it's just starting to actually get something going, and get that group kind of talking about this stuff would be helpful.
And do folks think it'd be helpful? And I mean, I'm not to have like a data literacy class, and I don't mean that in like a condescending, like, because I think it is hard sometimes if you're not in that data kind of world to know, okay, what's the difference between an outcome, output, input, throughput, you know what I mean? Like all these kinds of things. And what's the difference between like, what does correlation mean? Like, you know, and all those sorts of things, like just kind of basic. So we're all speaking the same language, and we all kind of know what those pieces are. Because I do think sometimes we do say like, oh, you know, this is our outcome. We had 10 people on probation, but that's, you know, that's an output. Like, and so that we know just kind of those basics. And I mean, not just for people that do it every day, like analysts, but people in the organization that's also nowadays kind of required to be the mouthpiece for some of this information. So we're kind of all speaking the same language.
I think that would be fantastic.
I think part of it, we need to decide what's the master database. Is it the court, because everything stems from the court? Or is it probation? Because there's a number of times where there isn't necessarily, you're not getting the same numbers. So that you have there's consistency in the data.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I think that's down the road if we want to have some sort of data mart where people push, you know, data from different sources into one singular spot, or if it's just each department reporting out on their piece relative to how it intersects with the CCP. But I also think one thing from the that the, you know, either managers, department heads, or whoever can add to it is also that when we're looking at stuff to look, because I know we discussed this kind of in our strategic planning sessions of not just focusing on like recidivism, like the typical things, and eventually moving past that and kind of measuring the progress versus perfection in some of those things. Because I think sometimes we have trouble of like, you know, let's say the jail implements a new program. Well, 6 people got out and committed a new crime, but they were all misdemeanors or something. So maybe that's progress and not perfection. And then instead of being booked 6 times, they were booked 2 times last week, you know, like those sorts of things. And that's because they actually got a job or other things that we don't typically kind of
I
move
think-
towards dissidents.
I feel like there's capacity issues when you start to get beyond like what we need to have versus what we would like to have or what we, you know?
Yeah.
And so it would be nice to collect a whole bunch of data on outcomes once people leave the jail. The reality is that we don't have a mechanism to necessarily do that unless it's through probation or behavioral health or, you know, another partner agency. Like that's not our process.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the benefit of the group process of, and we talked about this in the strategic plan, it's like, do we have, I mean, a part of it is, do we have that capacity? Because one of the goals was like, do we hire a CCP analyst like through, you know, the funds or those sorts of things. So I think that's part of the discussion of like, if we really, if that's important to us to track, you know, as they go through this, the linear process of the, you know, the court process, like, is it important for us to track it at each point and then how far beyond, and then what's our capacity to do that? But I think that's, I'm not saying that's where we're gonna hit it right out of the gate. Obviously, first we gotta meet and, you know, start with the widgets, but.
I think that, yeah, initially, each stakeholder can, you know, report out aggregated data, and then we work towards linking the data, some kind of data mart or something. So whether that be a like name and date of birth or something, kind of like the Stepping Up group, how Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah.
Did that.
And that's what, I mean, like how Steve was talking about our internal meeting, that's kind of how it's worked, is like, we've slowly kind of peeled away at stuff as, you know, we first got going. And some of that's as simple as we're just not inputting stuff all the same, you know, using, you know, a numerical value and a non-numerical value for this one thing. And then we clean that up and then we move on to like, I mean, we're getting to the point to where now we're looking at like, okay, is this program, you know, 6 people go to this program, 6 people go to this one. Like, why is this one more effective than this one? Like, we're getting to that stuff eventually, but it's like we just started with the basics of like, make sure we know how many people are on probation or how many people, you know, are in jail or whatever it is. So, but it's just that first step, I think, that we're struggling with getting past. Tanya or Alex or anyone else, do you guys have any input or discussion on this? No, okay. So does that, I mean, I've heard 2 things. One is, you know, kind of try to get a list together and what we're trying to accomplish relative to those things we want to look at. And the idea of having someone, in addition to the analyst, having someone be invited to those meetings to try to get them moving a little bit.
Would it be, I mean, obviously, everybody, for the most part, has, you know, the budget requests have been in, the kind of the stuff that that were submitted. So everybody internally kind of has those data points of what they've been tracking or an idea of what they could track on that. So would that be a good kind of like assignment for that meeting to actually at least have those prepared, look at what, you know, the requests were, and then kind of present that as a starting point and kind of talk. Yeah, that already been done.
Yeah, and maybe in addition to those data points, what source are they coming from? Excel spreadsheets? You know, how could this be reported?
Okay.
Like how it could be automated or something.
Yeah.
Any questions, concerns
I don't want to take up.
about what? About
Well, I mean, I think it goes to sort of the fundamental issues around like our budget submission versus others. And, you know, our budget is based on incarceration of people that were realigned, right? And we definitely keep data on who's incarcerated, right, and their status, and we provide that data to probation every quarter when we submit our budget. But there's always been kind of the push to look at what other programs we're doing in the jail or what other things that we're doing, which we gave a greater narrative to in this last submission, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think our fundamental premise is that our funding is for the incarceration of folks. So beyond that, like, I don't know, just I have some.
Well, so that's a good transition into Assembly Bill 2882. So the things that, and, you know, it's got, I think Phoebe probably knows a little bit about it because it talks about, one piece of it is kind of carving out some of the funds for, although I think it's 678, but it's around the CCP, for mental health care, for incarcerated individuals. It's the Steinberg Institute.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. We're not taking a position on it, we being behavioral health directors, because it's controversial.
Yeah, and so, I mean, not, you know, choosing a side or anything, but I mean, RCRC, Urban Cities, and CSAC, I think all came out against it or sent a letter against it. It changes the membership of the CCP. There's, I think it's
It's two people.
10% funding. But the one thing relative to what you were just saying is it adds a lot of stuff around reporting, the majority of which comes out of the jail. And it says the plan shall include quantifiable goals for improving, reducing the daily jail population, reducing jail bookings, reducing the average length of stay, reducing recidivism rates, increasing post-release connections and community-based behavioral health services for persons with serious mental health disorders. Shall include specific targets for reducing the disparities for populations in the system, and it lists what those groups are, and several, and on and on and on about those types of things. And it's interesting because the plan that it talks about, the other piece is that in the governor's budget, they've gotten rid of the funding for the plan. There used to be an incentive to submit the plan. That's gone away. So now there's questions of like, well, the county's going to submit the plan if there's no funding attached to submitting the plan. Like, what's the downside of not submitting a plan if they can't, like, if they're not sending you, I think it was 100 for small counties. So that's the other piece. The only thing I would say is that, and I'm not a politician, but I mean, it's my understanding that, you know, I mean, it does come from the Steinberg Institute, and my understanding is he has pretty good standing and pull in the legislature. So
I would just say, or push back a little bit in that you said it's primarily related to the jail. Like, I mean, are there things that we can do in the jail to help people be successful once they get released? Yes, but I would argue more strongly that that is what the CCP is all about as a group, as a collective, right? Because it's not just what happens in the jail that results in whether someone recidivates or not.
yeah,
right?
and I'm not saying it is. I was just reading what the legislation is moving towards, and I've always been a big fan of when you see legislation like this come up like 3 years in a row, like by the time when it passes, it's going to be a lot different. Like if you can read the tea leaves a little bit, it's good to get in front of it. And that's always what my goal has been, at least for the probation department, is that when we see, you know, on the juvenile side, we've seen 3 bills on our Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act. And I know that if they don't pass, pieces of those things always end up passing. If there's 3 bills in a row about the same thing, that there's some level of passion about getting these things passed. So I try to get ahead of those things and do it. So that's the,
Just like when you look at our jail population, like speak more eloquently about this, but as we're looking at Colleen, for example, right? Like predominant population is like a 7-day population. And so how much can you do with programs and all of that to help people? Once
So yeah, and it could, the answer could be like, because we're going through that right now on the juvenile side of like, we have to write this report about DJJ and how we address DJJ populations, the realigned population and all that kind of stuff. We haven't sent someone to DJJ in decades, but we still have to like write about how we address. Like, we have no impact on that because we don't even have a population on that, but we still have to have a plan around that population, even though we don't impact that population.
Wouldn't that, I mean, I agree with you but I think that's why ultimately what we need trying to figure out the data group and otherwise is that like everybody has a little bits of certain things that we don't have, certain aspects. You guys have data on lengths of stay and stuff like that. And if we can come together in the group setting and kind of when something eventually does pass, and it will be with this intent of what we do need to provide, we'll be in a better position to be able to kind of hopefully put all of our stuff together where we can tell that picture. So I think that's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, has this been going around? I mean, this probably isn't going to pass is the word, right? But something will eventually on.
I don't know. I mean, I can't say.
Here's the issue, like reducing the daily jail population and reducing, let's just look at that, right? So how do you reduce the daily jail population? Trial release, where you get agencies to stop booking people or people have to stop committing crimes, right? B, reducing jail bookings. The jail can't control the amount of bookings we receive because everybody feeds into us. So short of being like, hey, we're going to close Monday through Friday, how can a jail control that? I'm not blaming anybody in this room. I'm just saying that some of this stuff, the jail can't quantify it and we have no control.
Well, if you read this, I mean, ultimately it's the plan including goals around these things. So that's definitely like a CCP wide, those specific things. There are other, if you look at a different section, there's some more granular data pieces that they're looking at, but some of them kind of look like they're related to Calais type of measures as well, like people enrolled in Medi-Cal card relief, stuff like that.
Reducing the average length of jail stay. For which population? The sentence population?
Well,
There's only one person controls
And it talks about mental health stuff too, as well as, so I think, I mean, yes, we had the same thing with the juvenile hall, like, and sometimes with the recidivism level of like, you need to, like, if our recidivism level is like 10, you need to reduce that. Like 10 is like, I mean, not saying it's 0, but you're going to have, no matter what you do, there's going to be 5 to 10% of folks, even if everything changes, they're still going to cycle through the system. So I think the point is that at least you have the data, and it's not saying that you need to reduce it or you need to do anything, but you can say, hey, we've gotten to this bottom line. We're not under, like other jails, we're not under a consent decree, bursting at the seams. We've hit that kind of bottom level. Hey, we used to be at 200 people a day. Now we're at 100 and whatever people a day. You know what I mean? Like, but you can use that data to tell that story relative to whatever it is. I mean, that's like, we did agree to be a part of a program with the MacArthur Foundation. And Shannon and Jesse agreed to participate as well. And it's about reducing the use of incarceration around violations of probation. So we don't use incarceration very much for a technical violation, but there's little things that we have discovered that we can do around that, even though it's like, Jesse controls a piece, Shannon controls a piece, we control, you know what I mean? Like, they don't control all of it, but we have had these dialogues about how we can each do our own little part relative to something that's pretty small, at least in our community, and we're not really going to have a huge impact.
I do like the idea of a neon open close sign, like kind of the Sallyport gate right there. It might work.
You do control it. You don't have to open the. You don't have to open the Sallyport.
It's broken.
Definitely support the idea of like it not just putting it on the shoulders of like Brandon and Leslie and all the other folks that are kind of just part of managing the data or collecting the data, whatever it is, analyzing the data, but other folks that are focused or student focused or whatnot to collaborate because I totally agree with this last week and even collaborative approach around looking at the big picture. That's the goals of the CCP. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think, I mean, you know, whatever legislation comes out, like, because it does change, like 10 years ago, they forgot that it's saved from a federal consent decree or federal receivership and, you know, prisons have closed and saved, you know, millions, not billions of dollars and all these other things. And now it's like that next phase of what else can you do type of thing. So, and I think it's moved into that cycle. And that's just how things work is that, you know, you have the big event that occurs and you solve that problem and then people look into the next piece that they want to try to solve. So, so from that data literacy class or training, I don't know what to call it, class, and then potentially sending out that list again of those things that you guys had talked about before, the data elements, and then setting up a meeting and inviting the exec committee, and then they can assign whoever they want if they don't want to attend it themselves. So does that sound good? All right. Strategic plan update. The only thing, I mean, because the data piece was a big piece, if we can get that moving. The other piece was the public education. We've done some random things, like we presented it, I don't know, Kiwanis and some other like service groups and stuff like that, and NCCLI and some other things. But Kevin O'Connell, who someone brought up here a minute ago, they've done some stuff on the behavioral health side relative to some public meetings. And he had talked about maybe we could tie that into the CCP as well, because we had talked about at one point having, I don't know if town hall is the right word, but kind of these kind of structured meetings that he's kind of collaborated and done before, where it's like, okay, there's a couple of questions, people have some discussion, they vote on some things and that kind of thing. Where it provides them some input and education at the same time relative to things that are happening in the system. And so he had reached out saying, hey, is that something you're interested in doing? And so maybe, I mean, I guess at this point, maybe the next meeting, see if he's available to kind of give us a rundown of what that would look like. But I do think that would be an opportunity to check that public engagement piece, check
Hey,
that
Jeff.
box. Yeah.
At least the conversations I had with Kevin, and maybe I misunderstood, but let's fact check this. We were kind of talking about like wrapping it together with kind of that broader stepping up group that did community meetings for a while, and then and using it as a place to do updates on CareCore, SB 43, the jail inReach program, like all the different big initiatives that are happening alongside CCP stuff. And then just do one kind of community engagement event that wrapped all those things together.
Yeah, I mean, in the terms of like, I mean, I don't think we've had one in a long time, but where they had kind of those topics and, on the flip charts or whatever, and people could give feedback and that sort of thing. But yeah, like a kind of a guided discussion. Right. But I think that's a good starting point. But I think it might be helpful if he came here to explain it better than I could, as to what he envisions relative to that. But yes.
Are you good if we continue forward with planning for it while that happens?
Yeah,
because that train's sort of moving, and it'd be great to wrap this into that. Or
cool. I mean, is everybody else good with that? I don't know if other folks have attended those meetings or not.
Been a while.
Yeah, I think that was pre.
We did one during COVID that was virtual, and then we lost one.
What'd you say, Phoebe?
I said we did one during COVID that was virtual and way less engaging, but mostly they were pre-COVID in-person meetings.
Fire room, I think.
And it's, I mean, and I think the benefit of that, I mean, maybe we can expand engagement, but it's generally the same folks across systems and across meetings that engage in these sorts of things. So I guess it's good to have kind of a one-stop shop for all the things that are going on at the same time. So.
Yeah, and at least originally, I don't know that it would still happen, but we did have a fair number of like NAMI families and a handful of clients and peer supporters and kind of people that use our systems were there as well. And we would push hard to try to get that to happen again, just because I think that adds good richness to a conversation about systems.
And I'm not just saying this because it's you, but have we ever thought about having one in Truckee? Like expanding up to Truckee?
We haven't, no.
You got fire alarms going off all the.
Yeah, exactly. It's really
So
loud.
you can't do it.
Saying I doubt, doubt people will go to one side or the other of the county, but it'd be probably nice to engage folks on both sides of the county. Any other comments about the strategic plan? So there was the data piece, the community engagement, the reducing and preventing crime. We've talked about inventory of programs, and maybe next time we'll kind of update that. Interventions that are available. And I know that Alex, and I know that you've updated me on this, but I forget the law enforcement work group is still hanging out there, at least on the list.
Yes.
All right, moving on.
No, we'll talk about it. Let me, are you clear after this meeting? Can I give you a call? Try and figure out next steps?
Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about the Justice Mental Health Collaborative, and Phoebe just kind of talked about that. Primary care diversion.
Caretaker.
Caretaker diversion. It says primary care diversion on here for some reason. And that's going, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah,
if there's people that could.
I think if there are people who qualify for it, yes, it's going.
Okay. And improve overall life or quality of life in Nevada County and gather and analyze data to better understand homeless population, utilize data to develop strategies to address areas to support existing service providers. So I think, like I said, I think the data piece checks at least half the boxes on the strategic plan. So that'll be helpful. The last thing I had was talking about the assembly bill, but now you guys all have it, or at least know the number, so you can look it up. If you want this copy of it, you can.
Posted it in the chat too, so.
Okay.
Link to that.
Take a look at it. Like Phoebe said, I think some people are taking a position on it relative to their professional groups. Some aren't. That's something that you can look up.
Just reading that last part of the strategic plan, the data literacy training, are you thinking that would be something that some of the CBOs providers would also be invited to attend to make it kind of bigger than?
Yeah. And that's something that we've talked about. I think the Innovation Fund providing training interclasses or whatever you want to call it that would benefit kind of multiple areas, kind of like we did once with like the CIT training we did with the Myoka grant, where we did the crisis intervention training. Like those things that are kind of twofold. They give the training relative to some of the initiatives we're trying to push forward and bring, I think, more engagement for folks to participate when they see those things happening. So.
You talking innovation funds funding that, or are you talking about that?
No, it's just saying just doing the innovation funds was a piece of
Oh.
having more engagement, of having folks show up and be interested in the goings on of the CCP. All right, the last thing I have on the agenda is more public comment, as a closing public comment, which I don't think we have any public. Is there anything else that anyone else wants to bring up? And these are just the items that were listed from the feedback that Linda got. So. Is there anything else going once?
Actually, yes, I'm not sure if Jesse had the opportunity to talk to you or not, Jeff. At some point, we wanted to have discussion about another budget item that we did not include in the February request, and I'm not sure what the process would be to have a mid-year budget request, and it has to do with, we were notified last week that Cal OES is all grants that have VOCA funds are going to be reduced by 44%. So we have a budget gap that we're trying to figure out related to our victim witness and their services. So I'm not, what the right process is to do that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, he didn't contact me directly, but
Okay.
I would say, and anyone else on the executive committee can say otherwise, but would be to just add it to the budget or add it to the, sorry, not the budget, add it to the agenda. And then if the next meeting is out too far, then he can ask us to have a meeting sooner and ask for that to be on the agenda.
Okay.
But,
Do you have
Yeah.
a dollar amount that you think you're gonna be looking to request, Denise?
We're $100,000 for the fiscal year.
That's for next fiscal year, Denise.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
That's for 24-25.
For 24-25. And then, yeah, ongoing, we need to figure out how we're gonna manage that process if VOC is gonna be continuing to be reduced at that level federally.
Is there any other questions for Denise?
What alternatives are there?
Well, the question is, what are the alternatives? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, so so right now we've already have one set of funding that is going to sunset in December. And so we're gonna have a loss of a half of a temporary from that position. And then the reduction is this is gonna be another half to 3/4 of a full-time position. So we're looking at other funding possibilities, of which something was just forwarded the other day that Jeff, I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe it went to Sarah and then to me. So we're looking at, are there other alternatives out there? Are there, there might be able to be some internship possibilities. We may be able to look at moving things between SBUs, but we don't have a long-term plan right now. Like I said, we were just notified last week, you know. So right now it looks like come January, we would have funding. Right now we have 3.5 advocates and we would be at 2.5 in a year or 9 months. And right now the advocates are only servicing victims of felony crimes. We're not even doing misdemeanors unless there's a specific request from a victim of a misdemeanor crime. So there's a lot of victims that we're already not servicing.
I mean, I would say the only,
Complainants. I just have to say that they're complainants.
the only thing I would say is that if he decides he wants to call a meeting or ask to call a meeting and put it on the agenda that if he wanted to try to speed the decision along, I would say fill out kind of that budget request form like he did for the other items that were requested, or like everyone did for whatever items they requested in the budget, so that some of those questions could be answered or looked at before the meeting, maybe even if he gets it out to folks.
And Denise, I could send that to you if you don't have a kind of the template for that.
Okay, so right now, I think we could probably just move it into the next regular meeting. It was just, it's like, okay, what's the process? How do we want to do this since we're talking about an off budget cycle for this?
Any other questions, comments, concerns? I do appreciate the good turnout. I mean, we're missing a few voting members, but I do think it's a decent turnout for the group. So like I said, just follow up things, the data group stuff, and the bylaws, and then I'll try to get that stuff out to folks as soon as I have the information on the bylaws, and we'll get a meeting set up for the with the data group. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Sure. So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Hi,
Right.
All right, thanks.
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone. Bye.